Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Hemali, and the story that I want to tell you guys today is called the Kabuliwala. It's written by Rabindranath Tagore. I think it was written around the late 1800s, so it's over 100 years old. But I think the feelings still resonate today. Okay. Um, so my 5-year-old daughter Minnie, she never knew a moment of silence. Since she started speaking, all she could do was just ask me questions and talk about things that she'd heard all over. She would come to me one day and tell me, "Oh, Papa, you know what? The doorman told me that he calls a crow a kaka, or he calls it a kawa." She could not understand that different languages have different words for it. Or she would come and say, "The gardener told me today that it rains because there's a huge elephant behind the clouds, and he basically fills his trunk with water, and when he sprays it, that's how we get rain." Now, my wife used to find her a little bit annoying and sometimes would just tell her to shut up. But I could not do that. I used to love listening to her talk. So one day I was sitting at my window, I was writing a story when she suddenly came to my room and she started chatting away and she asked me, "What's the relationship between you and Mama?" And I just had to tell her, "Okay, I need to work now." When suddenly she ran to the window and she started shouting, "Oh, Kabuliwala, Kabuliwala." I walked up, I stood up and I went there. And yeah, there was a large man in the loose robes of people of Afghanistan. He was holding a huge bag on his shoulders. And on the other hand, he had a box full of grapes. At that moment, he turned and looked. And Minnie, she just got really frightened and she hid behind me. Now, the Kabuliwala was just standing at my gate. So I wanted to get my work done. So I knew the easiest and fastest thing to do would be just go buy some things from him and send him off on his way. So I went to the gate. Minnie was too scared. I think she thought that huge bag of his probably held like 5 or 6 little children, and she would not come out to meet the Kabuliwala. So I went there. I just bought some things from him, and we just somehow started talking about Russia and England and a little bit about politics and stuff. Soon he was going to go when he suddenly looked at me and asked that, "Sir, can I meet the little girl?" Now, I didn't want Minnie to have these false fears of what is there in the big bags and all. So I thought, yeah, it's a good idea for her to meet him. And I called her. But she was so nervous. He tried to bribe her a little bit by giving her some nuts and some raisins, but she would not leave my pajama and she would just hide behind my legs. That was the first meeting that Minnie and the Kabuliwala had. Now, a few days later, I was walking out of my door and I was startled. Outside the door on the bench, Minnie was sitting, and at her feet, the tall, great Kabuliwala. And both of them were chatting away and laughing away to glory. It seemed that after her 5 years, Minnie had finally found someone who would listen to her all day, this great man from Afghanistan. Except for me, of course, nobody would hear her talk so much. And I found out that this was not the first or second time they had met. The Kabuliwala had been coming and driving her slowly and steadily with nuts and raisins till they became great friends. So I went up to them and I saw at the corner of a little sari, there was a little bunch of nuts and raisins. And I told the Kabuliwala, "Why did you give this to her?" I took a few coins out from my pocket and I gave it to the Kabuliwala. He did not say no. He just smiled at me and pocketed the coins. After a few hours, when I came back home, I found my wife shouting at Minnie. It seemed that she had found some shiny coins with Minnie. And when she asked her, "Where did you get these coins?" she said, "Hey, the Kabuliwala gave them to me." He had given her back the coins. This friendship went on for a long time. And they had these quaint little jokes that they would, say repeatedly every day. And they would just laugh as if there was something new. One of the jokes was she would go and ask, "Kabuliwala, Kabuliwala, what's in that big bag of yours?" And the Kabuliwala, in his nasal accent of Afghanistan, would say, "Isme ek bada hathi hai." It's a big elephant inside that sack of mine. And they would start laughing. It was not a very funny joke, but they somehow found it very amusing. And then it was the Kabuliwala's turn to ask Minnie, "So, Minnie, when are you going to your father-in-law's house?" Now, Minnie was small, and my wife and I, we considered ourselves to be quite modern. Usually, girls in Bengal at that time knew what a father in law's house meant because they would be married off soon, but we had not spoken to Minnie about it. Now, Minnie did not want the Kabuliwala to know that she had no idea what he was talking. So he would say, "Hey, what about you? When are you going to go to your father in law's house?" Now, in the father-in-law's house, in terms of the Kabuliwala and the men of those days, it was a slang for jail. So he would just laugh and he would say, I am going to thrash my father in law. And she would just start laughing, imagining the guy's predicament once he was thrashed. And that's how they just remained really great friends. My wife is quite a timid woman, and she would find anything unknown to her quite scary. So she would tell me, do you think this is healthy? Do you think it's okay for this big man to come and sit? Well, what if he kidnaps her? What if he does something to her? And I knew it was not impossible, but when I saw them, I found this friendship between this big tall man and a little girl. I found it strangely fascinating, and I found it quite sweet and gentle. So I did not ban him from coming to my house, and it continued. It continued for quite a few months. Now, January is usually the time when the Kabuliwala would go off to his house in Afghanistan. He would go home for a few months, go back home, and come back. So that was a very busy period for him because he had to go around the town. He had to go collect all payments from all the people who owed him money. Now, one of those January, I was sitting at my desk writing when I suddenly heard this huge hullabaloo outside on the street. There was a lot of commotion coming. I walked to the window and I saw the Kabuliwala in his loose robes. His shirt was a little bloodstained, and there were two policemen who were holding him, and his hands were bound in front of him. I quickly rushed out of the gate. Now, from the other people around there, I found out that apparently there was one of the neighbors and he had bought a very expensive shawl from the Kabuliwala. And when the Kabuliwala went to collect his payment, he refused. He said, no, I have not bought anything from you. And in that argument, there was a lot of anger and a lot of fear. The Kabuliwala injured him. He stabbed him and injured him. So he was arrested. He was standing over there when suddenly Minnie came rushing out and he's like, Kabuliwala, Kabuliwala, what are you doing? Are you going to your father-in-law's house? The Kabuliwala smiled and said, yes, that's exactly where I'm going today, Minnie. Minnie did not understand this and she did not laugh the way he expected her to. So then he just said, I would have thrashed my father-in-law, but then my hands are bound. And he was sent to prison for quite some years. Time went by, we got busy with our own life. And I'm quite ashamed to say that we did not think of this tall man from Free Mountains, this free mountaineer who was in jail right now. And I'm ashamed to say, even Minnie, after some time, forgot about him. She was growing up, she was busy with new friends, new life. A few years went by like this. We arranged for Minnie's marriage. She was supposed to get married during Durga Puja. Soon that time came, and the house was full of excitement and full of activity. People were putting up chandeliers, there was dance and music going on all around the house. I was sitting and doing my accounts when suddenly I saw somebody come and said, good morning, sir. I looked up. I could not recognize the man, but then he smiled and I saw it was Rehmat, the Kabuliwala. And I said, oh, Rehmat, when did you come? He said, just yesterday, sir. I was released from the jail yesterday. Jail. That word just struck so harshly to my mind. I said, on this auspicious day when my daughter is getting married, I do not want this bad omen. It seemed like bad omen to me because I had never met somebody who'd been to jail. I'd never met somebody who'd wanted to harm their own fellow human being. So I just told him, I said, Remat, today there are some ceremonies happening in the house and we will not be able to spend too much time with you, unfortunately. I saw him feel a little sad. He turned, but then when he went at the door, as he reached the door, he turned back and he said to me, he said, sir, can I just meet the little one for a while? And I saw in his hands on a piece of paper, he had some nuts and raisins. He said the little one. I think he still imagined Minnie to meet that little girl with whom he spoke and he laughed. He did not know how grown up she was now. And he was imagining the same conversations and laughter that he had with her years back, almost a decade back. So I told him, no, there are ceremonies. She cannot really, meet you today. His face fell. He looked at me wistfully, and then he just passed the packet of paper to me. And he said, sir, can you just give this to her, please? I took some money to pay him. I took the packet and I took some, and he just held my hand. He said, no, sir, please. Just give me your blessings. Have me in your thoughts. I have a little girl back home who's just like your little girl. And when I meet her and I think of my own daughter and I get little, gifts and nuts for your daughter, I'm not doing this for profit. I'm not doing it. And suddenly he put his hand in his pockets and he took out a small dirty piece of paper and kept it on my table. It was It was an impression of a tiny hand. It was not a photograph, it was not a picture or a drawing, but it was just this ink smeared impression of a tiny hand of his daughter whose impression he had kept next to his heart all of these years when he was away from home and he came to the dusty lanes of Calcutta to sell his wares. Tears filled my eyes. And at that moment, I did not think of him as a poor little Kabuliwala who had been to jail and I am a writer. We were both fathers. We were both fathers of little girls. And I could not let him go away like this. I immediately sent for Minnie. People were not happy. My wife was not happy because she was in the process of getting ready for her marriage. But I insisted and I got Minnie. Minnie suddenly came to my office dressed in her bridal red silk sari and with sandalwood on her forehead, and she was shining and glowing like a bride. I think Rahmat, the Kabuliwala, was really startled to see her. There was no way he had imagined that the little girl with whom he joked and laughed and spoke would turn into this big, beautiful bride. He could not have the same friendship that he had with her at that time. So he just smiled and said, "So, little girl, are you going to your father-in-law's house today?" Now Minnie, of course, knew what father-in-law's house means, and she could not laugh the way she used to earlier. She just looked down. She was blushing. She was shy. She just looked down, and she left in some time. After Minnie left, I just took out a huge sum of money and I just gave it to Rahmat. He was saying no, but I just put it in his hand and I told him, Rahmat, just go back. Go back home to your family, go back to your own home, go back to your own daughter, right? Take this money and go back. Maybe just the meeting of you and your daughter, the joy it'll bring to you and your daughter. I just hope that that brings auspiciousness to my own daughter's life, right? Now that was a huge amount of money, and because of that, I had to cut down on some festivities. I could not have as many electric lights as I wanted. I could not have the military band that we decided to play. We decided to have on after the wedding. The women in the house were not very happy. But for me, the festivities were brightened just by the thought that in some distant land, there would be a father, long lost father, reuniting with her daughter. And that just filled my heart with such joy. That was all the ceremony and the celebration that I needed for that day. Thank you. That's the story.